Hi everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to recommend books to do with fairy tales, starting with these two on the screen, which are both about, well, they're collections of fairy tales or bind-ups of fairy tales. If you're looking to read real original fairy tales, I think the best place to start is Angela Carter's book. This is by Virago Press. It's a bind-up that she did for them. There are illustrations in it. Marina Warner wrote the afterword, and the fairy tales are collected from all over the world. There's a really good selection. It's not just Western fairy tales, and it's not just the old favourites. You will get old favourites in here, like Baba Yaga's in here, Sleeping Beauty, Little Red Riding Hood, Frog Prince, but you will also get other ones that maybe you haven't come across before, so it's a really nice collection of well-loved and fresh, at least for me. And she arranges the fairy tale by motif, so strong minds and low cunning is one chapter, witches is another chapter, unhappy families. So if you like a particular tale or you like a particular theme, this is also a really good book to start with. If you are looking for fairy tales but also want some academic comment on them, this Norton Critical Edition, edited by Maria Tartar, is really fantastic. They have the old traditionals in here, so Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, those ones. There's some Oscar Wilde ones in here too. And they have different tellings. So for example, for Bluebeard, they give you Perrault, the Grimm brothers, Joseph Jacobs and Margaret Atwood. There's some Roald Dahl poems in here too. So it's not just all Grimm or Perrault or Hans Christian Andersen. There's a range. And then in the back they also have criticism, and again, if you're looking to get into scholarship about fairy tales, they have some prop here. They have Maria Tartar, they have Zipes is in here, Karen Rowe, so people that you would will really help you to get introduced to fairy tales if you haven't done a lot of reading about them. Really good and foundational scholarship. So those are the two collections that I would recommend to somebody starting out. I also have two scholars that I would recommend. The first is Jack Zipes. He's probably, I don't want to say he's the most recommended, but he's certainly one of the most recommended fairy tale scholars. These are the two books I would recommend depending on where you want to go with your reading. So on the left, this is another anthology called The Sorcerer's Apprentice, but it's introduced by a 100-page essay where Zipes is kind of asking the question of why were the Harry Potter books so popular, and he talks about the Sorcerer's Apprentice motif in those novels. And then he collects tales about sorcerers' apprentices from around the world. So that's really fun. This is more academic the whole way through. I really like his discussion of Bluebeard in the Irresistible fairy tale, and it's as a cultural and social history. I think that's fair. He really looks at like the cultural dynamics that bring fairy tales to the fore. The other scholar that I would recommend is Marina Warner. This is my favourite book of hers. All of her books are to me fantastic. She has a book about the bogeymen. She also, I think, started out more as a scholar of religious imagery. So she has a book about Joan of Arc and a book about Mary, the Virgin Mary. She has a book about maidens. I forget the title of it. All her work is so rich and so fun. You don't feel, if you read Zipes, you're going to feel like you get your academic money's worth. With Warner, it just feels like going on an adventure. And her books always have so many examples, so much richness in them. Always she has lots of illustrations and pictures and introduces you to so many different things and looks at things in really interesting ways. This is a book that you can just pick up again and again. And you can see it floating around quite cheap on certain websites. So I would definitely recommend this book if you are interested in, I think, stories in general and how stories kind of intersect and how certain motifs can become part of storytelling traditions. I mean, here this chapter is about the cross, and this is another one about saints. So again, a scholar to really watch out for. I wanted to recommend some poetry, and so I decided I would recommend 2 poems about fairy tales. The first is probably quite an obvious one. This is Christina Rosetti's poem Goblin Market. The poem is about 2 sisters called, well, the text says they're sisters. What that means is open to your interpretation, I think. They're called Laura and Lizzie. Where they live, goblins come through the woods and entice young women to eat fruit, which I think, you know, the symbolism is pretty in your face for that. And Laura is tempted and eats, and the poem is about the temptation, I think, but also about the ways that Lizzie saves her sister, and the religious and other dimensions to that. The thing I loved most about this poem, and this is going to sound strange, is the description of the fruit. I think I read somewhere that Victorian readers at the time, fruit would have been really luxurious, and it would have actually, the temptation, you know, would have been even more tangible, I think, to them than to us. And the way Rossetti describes the different fruits and the goblins calling out to the girls about what fruit they have and where it comes from is very luscious and rich and almost intoxicating. So she really gets that fairy tale atmosphere down in this poem, I would say. The other poetry collection that I would recommend is Anne Sexton's Transformations. These are straight up fairy tale retellings. She had the introduction written for her by Kurt Vonnegut, so if you're a Kurt Vonnegut fan, you can read some of his thoughts, which is, you know, fun, I guess. I really like all these poems. Anne Sexton is one of my favourite poets of all time. I'm very drawn to her work. The Gold Key is her Bluebeard retelling. I would say that that's perhaps my favourite in the collection, although I also really like the Maiden Without Hands, this one. So if you are a poetry person or you want to read more poetry centred around fairy tales, I would say these are 2 great places to start. I don't read as much poetry as perhaps I would like to. Yeah, so if you have poetry recommendations, especially fairy tale poetry recommendations, I would be very grateful if you would put them in the comment box for me if you have the time. Anne Sexton, I think you would also like her fairy tale retelling poems if you like this, which I'm sure you expected to see on the list. This is Angela Carter's The Bloody Chamber. And I read a lot of fairy tale retellings, but I can remember reading this for the first time when I was about 17 or 18. And that was the first time I really understood what a fairy tale retelling could be and how dark it could be. And Anne Sexton, I think, gets that too. So if you enjoy how Angela Carter has this very dark, seductive, unnerving vibe almost to me, you will enjoy Anne Sexton's Transformations, I think. They both have that in common. The Bloody Chamber, if you haven't read it, is a fantastic short story collection based on different fairy tales. And I think The Lady in the House of Love might be my favourite. The title story, The Bloody Chamber, is a Bluebeard retelling. All of these are dark, and all of these will stay with you. Because they're short stories, I'm not going to talk too much about the content because I feel like I might give away spoilers and I'm nervous to do that. But she takes on the theme of sort of animal changes, sexual violence, the relationships between mothers and daughters are quite prominent in this, jealousy. All of that is contained in these retellings. I highly, highly recommend Angela Carter if you haven't read this and you do like fairy tale retellings. I think this is definitely worth a try. Okay. Right. The next novel that I'm going to recommend is Bitterthorn by Kat Dunn. This is a story of Mina, who is sort of unwanted in her family, quite an elite family. And in her village or town, there is a witch who takes young men for a certain period of, I think it's every 50 years? It's a certain period of time that the witch takes men. And Mina ends up being the first woman that the witch has ever taken. So this is a kind of gender swap fairy tale retelling. Mina as a character is very well done. And so is the witch, who is both sympathetic and also kind of ugly. But then Mina is sympathetic and also kind of ugly in some ways. There's also a lot of vampire overtones here. I'm sure she's called Mina because of Dracula. I don't know that, but I suspect that that's the case. And lots of imagery of weaving and fairy tales. Kat Dunn is a fantastic writer. She has a new book coming out next year, which I'm really looking forward to. And this book is organised by seasons, so like autumn, winter, spring, summer are each of the 4 parts, I believe. I definitely think this is worth a try if you like sapphic retellings, if you like vampire overtones without obvious blood, if you like gender reversals to common stories. All of these would be would be good choices. If this would be a good choice if you like those things. That's what I'm trying to say. Next, this book is The Snow Child by Ivey. This is about a couple called Jack and Mabel. I think the wife is called Mabel, but I'm not sure. The husband's definitely called Jack. They're in their 50s and they have struggled to have children, and that time has now sort of passed them by. And it's not something as a couple that they've ever really been able to address together. And they move to the wilderness in Alaska, and they end up becoming parents in different ways that you wouldn't expect. The story itself, the fairy tale element, is a retelling of the Snow Maiden, which is a fairy tale about how a childless couple make a child from snow. If you have, any kind of child loss or nervousness about pregnancy, I don't think this might be the best book for you. Or go in at least knowing that, child loss is going to be a theme in this book. There is a character in this book called Esther, and she's such a good character. And I mean good, both in the, she's a good character, but also in she is a decent, honest, exciting person. Almost like Marilla in Anne of Green Gables is who I would equate her to. So yeah, I really recommend this. It's set, I don't know if I mentioned, but it's set in Alaska, and the wilderness and the world of Alaska is almost the main character of this book. The descriptions of animals and nature, the natural world, are really rich and vivid. Ivey is a fantastic writer of cold places and cold stories. And this is very ethereal. And it is a fairy tale retelling, and it has magical realism elements, but it's not too far into magical realism. I think that the story itself is actually quite concrete. So if you fear fairy tale retellings where it sort of goes off the deep end, and I've got a couple of those, I guess, experimental retellings, but you still want a retelling, you just don't want the experimentation, this one would be a good one to give a go, I think. Okay, I recently finished reading this book. This book is Juniper and Thorn by Reid. The best book I read this year is probably Reid's A Study in Drowning. I mean, there's 4 months left to the year, so it might be surpassed. I doubt it. And I just want to read everything she's ever written. I adored this novel. This is dark, dark, dark. And speaking of trigger warnings, definite trigger warning for eating disorders in this. And for food in general. This is a retelling of the juniper tree, where a heavy motif of that fairy tale is cannibalism. And the ways that Ava Reid is able to take that motif and translate it into something new, but also something very thematic, I'm blown away by it. Because she has actual cannibalism in line with the story, but she has so many food metaphors and images and so many different complicated relationships with food in this book. It's very, very well done indeed. This is about a girl called Marlinkian, who has 2 older sisters, and all 3 of them are witches. And her father is extremely controlling. A really good depiction of an abusive parental relationship, in my opinion, in this novel. And she falls in love, and she wants to be with the person that she falls in love with. And her father, and to some extent her sisters, don't want that. And so it's about her journey to become, or to get what she wants out of life. One of the things that I think Reid gets really right about abusive relationships, especially abusive parental relationships, is that a response to that can often be to fawn and to try to please, and how that in itself becomes this kind of trap. And trying to be good and trying to get it right can in many ways lead you into further abuse rather than sort of fighting back and trying to get it wrong. I really appreciated her depiction of abusive relationships here. If I say any more, I think it would be spoilers, so I'm not going to. But beautifully written, fantastic protagonist, really great retelling, with the themes of the fairy tale there without them being like over elaborated or too obvious. This is another gender reversal fairy tale. I also think it might be a bit of a Jane Eyre, Rebecca gender reversal tale. So if you like those novels, I think you would also like this. This is The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. That's how I say it, but I might be saying that wrong. This is about an unnamed male husband. And how often do you have a male character who's unnamed? I think that in itself is a really interesting point. Who falls in love with a woman called Indigo, and they get married, but she makes him promise to never ask or inquire about her past. So it's a Bluebeard retelling, I would say. The thing that stood out to me about this book is how luscious the images were. Everything is so rich and so decadent, and the scenes are just very opulent. It feels like you're just taking a huge bite out of a very rich wedding cake, I would say that. And I really enjoyed that. Even though the book itself isn't long, the prose makes you feel full, like going through it. I liked it. I thought the mystery, I sort of guessed the twist a bit early on, but I read it for the way it was written rather than the twist, so that didn't bother me too much. And if you like Bluebeard retellings, I think this would be a fun one to read. Okay, this is another fantastic author. This is T. Kingfisher. I love all her books. I could have put Nettle and Bone on this list, but I decided to just pick this one. This is a retelling of the Goose Girl fairy tale. It's about a young girl called Cordelia, whose mother is a sorceress, and she is in various ways trapped in her mother's plots and schemes. One of the things, again, that I really liked about this book is just like Juniper and Thorn, is the way that the abusive relationship between the parent and the child is depicted. One of the things we find out very early on that Cordelia's mother can do is she can take over her mind almost, so that Cordelia can't move her body and she can only behave in certain ways, so she loses control of herself. And I thought that was a really brilliant metaphor for any kind of abuse, but especially parental abuse towards a younger child who's kind of, I don't know, loses their autonomy in some way because of the way that the parent controls them. Also, the depiction of the horse Falada in this is great. T. Kingfisher knows how to write. You're going to be in safe hands reading a book by her. She also writes characters of a range of ages, and I appreciated that there are some other characters in this who, again, I won't talk too much about because of spoilers, but not everybody in this is 21 marrying a 500-year-old fairy, which is no shade to like Sarah J. Maas and books like that. I love them, but sometimes I want to read a book about somebody who's in their 60s and still is able to have adventures that don't necessarily end with them marrying a king, I guess. But yeah, I really love this. Great depiction of female relationships and female friendship and how that can overcome a lot of difficulties, and also a really good depiction of evil animals. So yeah, highly recommend. Okay, I've got 2 novels left, and they're both more experimental than the ones that have gone before. The first is Rouge by Mona Awad. This is, I think I saw a review somewhere that described this as a David Lynch, if David Lynch films were books, it would be this. I also think there was another review that compared it to a Lana Del Rey song. I definitely get the David Lynch vibes. This is surreal, very dreamlike, like you're going into kind of like a velvety mist when you read this book. And you do need to surrender, I think, the desire for like a structured, clear plot. And you do need to be up for some stronger magical realism than anything I've recommended before. This is about, oh, I forget her name. Belle is her name. Yes, Mirabelle, but she's called Belle. Her mother dies, and she goes back to California to kind of settle up her mother's affairs. Belle is obsessed with skincare, obsessed with it, and really what she's obsessed with is not looking her age. This is very much a take on the beauty industry and aging and the kind of ways that women don't want to age. And I thought that was really interesting because there is this sense of like, why don't we want to age, and why is it the most desirable to look almost like a child? Like, what does that say about society? Awad asks some uncomfortable questions in this book. She's also very funny about skincare and the language of skincare and like the language of sort of the spa. And Awad writes these female protagonists who are going through kind of very difficult situations and having almost like these breakdowns in funny ways, but also very realistic. I mean, not realistic in the literal sense, but credible ways, I suppose what I'm trying to say. And Rouge is no exception to that. Also, the mother, as she's remembered in this by her daughter, is... yeah, she's very well done, I thought. Again, I felt like I knew the sort of person that the mother was in a lot of ways, and I felt like I could pick her out on the street if I saw her. I had a very clear sense in my mind of what this character was about. Again, there's sort of vampire elements going on here. Trigger warning, I would say, for child abuse if you're reading this. But other than that, I would recommend this if you're looking for something seductive, rich, and not necessarily, uptight in terms of how plots work and not realistic. That's all I'm trying to say. This is more experimental. And finally, my last book is the most experimental. This is Helen Oyeyemi's Mr. Fox. I could have put so much Helen Oyeyemi on here. Gingerbread is another really good fairy tale retelling. Boy Snow Bird. She has a short story collection called What Is Not Yours Is Not Yours, and there's also strong fairy tale motifs to that. But I picked Mr. Fox because I'm a sucker for a Bluebeard retelling. And Mr. Fox is sort of the English version of the Bluebeard folktale. And I really like Mr. Fox as a character, and I really like Mary Fox as a character. This novel is not for you if you want to have a very clear beginning, middle, and end. This novel is for you if you want to think about how stories work and what matters in how stories work, and if you're feeling like you want to think about the meta levels of fairy tales, I guess. Briefly, in terms of plot, Mr. Fox is a writer who keeps killing off his female characters in very violent ways. Mary Fox is his muse, who sort of thinks that he's a serial killer for what he's doing. And Mr. Fox's imagination perhaps brings her to life. Or maybe it's all fantasy, maybe being alive and being dead doesn't really matter in this book. Like I said, there's no beginning, middle and end. There's also not really an alive or dead. Each chapter is almost like a different short story about Mr. Fox and Mary Fox, and also Mr. Fox's wife, Daphne. Again, strong, I mean, I guess Jane Eyre is a Bluebeard retelling, so in these sort of Bluebeard retellings, like The Last Tale of the Flower Bride, and this one, and I think I mentioned another that maybe that's also present in, you get strong Jane Eyre vibes from this, especially early on, and I really appreciated how Oyeyemi plays with and reworks the motifs from Bronte's Jane Eyre. Yeah, this one is fun, but only if you're in the mood to let go. Sometimes I'm not in the mood to let go, and books like this can annoy me. I only read Oyeyemi when I am feeling like, okay, take me wherever we're going. I don't feel like I need to end up at a particular destination, if that makes sense. Okay, I have probably rattled on a lot again. Like I said, with books, I can't help myself. I always want to just talk and talk and talk about them. Please let me know in the comment box below any fairy tale retellings that you've enjoyed. I'm always on the lookout for them. And thank you if you've stayed this far for sitting with me and hearing my opinions. They're much appreciated. And I probably won't make another book video for a little while. I wanted to make one about dark academia and I wanted to make one about fairy tales, but I don't really have another idea at the moment, so I will just wait until inspiration strikes. Until then, I will be back with more stationery videos if you're into that kind of thing. Thank you so much for staying with me during this video. I really appreciate it. Take care. Bye.